Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. For this entire week, including Talking Point, we're going to be focusing on women in politics, women in academia, women in various political roles. And this is the focus, of course, leading up to Women's Day, which is going to be happening on Saturday. And of course, it's worth honoring the women who have really made massive strides in terms of getting into a very difficult space, which is that of the political spectrum. So for today, we're going to be speaking to, in the first two segments of the show, to Vuyiswa Ramokgopa. She is the Gauteng MEC for Agriculture and Rural Development, and of course she is also the National Chairperson of Rise Mzansi. MEC, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Good evening, Faraz, and salam alaikum to all of the viewers this evening.
No, alaikum salam. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on MEC. Of course, the last time we spoke to you, you still are the national chairperson, but as of course, before, of course, you earned that seat within the Gauteng legislature. So, MEC, let's start off with the year 2025. I mean, in your opinion, where are women now in terms of the political spectrum within South Africa?
So I think South Africa is actually one of the countries that has taken the lead in terms of representation, at least, of women in the national parliament as well as in the provincial legislatures. I think we currently sit with 46% of women in the National Assembly being women representatives. So that's very progressive, even in relation and in comparison to some of the more developed countries in the world. And it's something we can be proud of. But I think what we still have work to do on, obviously, is seeing, the representation of women actually impacting the lived experience of women in South Africa. Unfortunately, again, we still are plagued with, challenges around gender-based violence, marginalization, even in terms of the economic benefits and the role that women play in the private sector. If I look at the JSE, for example, we're still talking in 2025 about the lack of female CEOs on the JSE, and I think that broader social transformation has yet to happen. But at least as a country, we've taken a policy view around it, and we are seeing increased levels of women in public leadership.
MEC, currently in the Gauteng provincial legislature, of course, where you have a seat on 80 seats, of course, there is a high representation of women that are having it. Is this enough in terms of the overall representation, or have female representation exceeded expectation?
Look, I think that, as I've just stated, the representation part has made good progress, both in the legislature and in the National Assembly. And I'd say in the legislature, we are also in a similar place. I think we sit at about 45% women representation in the provincial legislature. But it does have to go further. It's not just about representation. It's also about ensuring that we have the quality of leaders and candidates in public representation that are needed. It's not enough to just say we've got women, we tick our box and we move. Those women must still be held to the same standards as everybody else, in that we must demand, leaders who are competent, leaders who are ethical, who don't come with a cloud of corruption or scandal behind them. And we're not just going to give women a pass because they're women. I think we must also, as women leaders, understand that we're not there representing ourselves. We are also there representing the women broadly in society. And unfortunately, when a woman fails in a high-profile position, it has a dramatic impact in society, probably unfairly more so than when a man fails. You'll see in some instances, women leaders will be involved in a scandal and people will say, well, you see, women are failing, but the same doesn't apply necessarily when it's men. So I think we have to be aware of that. And there is more to be done in terms of ensuring that we don't just have representation, but that we have the caliber and the quality of leaders that we want representing us. And they should be a representation of society, both in terms of gender, as well as race, and as well as demographic. We need to have younger women also
Sure.
who are able to understand, the plight of the younger people in society and who are more invested in the future of this country. So I think we've made great strides, but there's certainly a lot more to be done to ensure we get the quality of leaders and women leaders in public leadership.
Yeah, you're mentioning, MEC, that of course when there's a scandal that affects a male representative within the political spectrum, it's kind of swept under the carpet or not mentioned that much. But when it's a female representative, and unfortunately, I mean, this is the case, that it becomes a much spoken about discussion. And now it leads to the next question about, what are the main challenges that a lot of women face when entering this very intense, hostile, and a challenging sphere, which is politics?
So, I mean, women, there are a number of challenges, and I think I'll get to that. I think women bring a lot also to the political space, and as challenging as it may be, I actually believe that naturally women are community builders. Women are organizers. Women, if you give a woman 1 rand of your tax dollars, it's not going to the pocket necessarily. It is going to be used broadly in society. And I think there's enough statistics and even anecdotally sayings that say, when you empower a woman, you empower a nation. So I think there's a lot of value that women bring in public leadership. But of course, the challenges are there. It is in many ways a very male-dominated space. It is a space where you are contesting for power. And with that comes all kinds of other things. Access to resources is a big one. People need resources to campaign, to get their names out there, etc. And women often don't have very high value networks. They are not invited into the dark, smoky rooms where men are making deals and discussing, who gets to be next. And it also boils down to the social relationships. We can't underestimate those things. I come from the private sector before I was in politics. And in the private sector, and I assume it's the same here, we would often talk about the deals that are done on the golf course. Now, if you as a woman are not on that golf course, or in that cigar lounge or wherever where those deals are being done, you are inevitably outside of where, the decisions are being made. And I think it's often more of those social and softer exclusions. It's not a legislative issue because we have quotas, we have employment equity, and women are, for all intents and purposes, in the room, but they are not often where the decisions are being taken, and they are not in those high value networks and able to access the resources, to access the social capital, to be recommended by somebody. And then there's also just on the more darker side of it, a lot of women will tell you even about abuse and being forced, to do things that perhaps their male counterparts would not be required to do, just to get a foot in the door. And unfortunately, we shouldn't sweep these things under the carpet. Yes. We must talk about them, we must confront them, and we must find ways to navigate them so that we can make politics a desirable space for young women to get involved and to see themselves and to build careers. So it is a tough space, but I think that there are many women who are doing great work out there, and often the work perhaps is not as recognized as others, but a lot of the top leaders in all different parties, actually I can point to many different parties, where the women are shaking the ground. And I think we need to pay a lot more attention and invest more in women leaders.
Just before we go to the break, MEC, I mean, you've mentioned all of that, and I think one of the more worrying factors is, although we are seeing a rise of female leadership across the world, there's still an underrepresentation, I beg your pardon, within the high-level political positions globally. Is it a cause for concern, or are we seeing maybe an upward trend in terms of that maybe changing, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, leaders, and particularly public representatives, are a representation of the society that they lead. And we represent the values and the culture and the norms of that society, and of course, the aspirations of that society. So, what we see as an outcome in the public domain is no different from perhaps what we experience day to day in our society. And South Africa certainly still has a way to go before, women are truly taken as equals in the space of leadership. It's not going to be a top-down approach. Simply appointing a female president or whatever does not resolve, the socio-cultural issues that give us the society that we have. And I'm saying, I think it's a part of how society evolves and should evolve. Countries, even like the USA that have had their democracies for many years, have still not been able to install a woman president. And it's not because they don't believe in equality, but it's because it's a reflection of that society. And I think if we truly endeavor to see more women in leadership, the question we really must be asking and what we should be working on is saying, do we as society truly believe in the leadership of women and in all of our spaces, in our churches, in our homes, in our family businesses, in the JSE, in the listed sector. And when you look across the board, are we seeing that as a trend? Because it requires an all of society alignment before you can really get the critical mass. And let me say again, for me, it's not about representation. It's about ensuring that you have the best crop of people to choose from in terms of the leaders that are available to us. There could be many great leaders who sit amongst us, but we overlook them because they don't have the right race or the right gender, or they're not the right age. And I think when we make those calls for equality, when we make the call for representation, it's about saying, if we want South Africa to work, we have to make sure we have the best people available to us. And that doesn't work if half of the population is excluded.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa. We are discussing women in politics, which we're going to be running for this entire week here on Hilaal TV, on News in Focus and Talking Point. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm in conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, Gauteng MEC for Agriculture and Rural Development. She's also the National Chairperson of Rise Mzansi. Again, Vuyiswa, thank you so much for staying with us. Vuyiswa, every Women's Month, we're talking the same scourge. We're talking this pandemic, gender-based violence. And again, it comes into sharp focus. If it's not this month, then of course it's the 16 days of activism at the start of December. What do you feel from a legislative perspective needs to be done in order to make sure more is done to eliminate this pandemic? I know it's a recurring question, but
Sure.
it's one that needs to be spoken about because we're still dealing with a problem that seems to have no end in sight.
Absolutely. And I think we shouldn't tire about speaking about this until we actually start to see movement and a resolution. So I'm certainly not tired of having this discussion year in and year out because we're not yet at the point when we've resolved it. And let me start by saying, it is not gender-based violence and domestic violence broadly is not simply a policing matter. Let me give you an example. When we had the COVID lockdowns, and one of the things, of course, features of the COVID lockdown was that you were not allowed to purchase alcohol. And what we saw immediately in terms of national statistics was that the rates of violent crime reduced significantly because of the reduction or the lack of access to alcohol, including gender-based violence. Because again, if you study the nature of this, there are patterns and trends and things that exacerbate, the trends that we see. So socioeconomic factors play a role. When we have high periods of unemployment or instances of unemployment, when you have issues around alcohol abuse and an inability to deal with alcohol abuse. And then, of course, very importantly, policing that is unresponsive to the nature of the crime. In other words, you can't you can't deal with gender-based violence the same way you deal with a cell phone thief or a car thief, because by definition, it is a crime of family and of a domestic nature more often than not. And so there have to be specialized facilities to be able to engage with victims of gender-based violence. Police have to be adequately trained and understand, the nature of the crimes. And I'm saying, if we are serious about wanting to deal with this, we have to take a systemic approach and understand what are the systems and the elements in society, both at a social level, at an economic level, but also at a legislative or policing level, that need to be strengthened or need to be dealt with. And that certainly doesn't come from just having one department called the Department of Women that has the smallest budget out of all departments and hoping that they will resolve the issue. It has to be an all of society approach. I mean, one of the other things that has come out in the research is that often those who are perpetrators of gender-based violence are known to their community, to their friends, and are known to be perpetrators. So how then do we as society also create social consequences for this issue? And we have to be louder, more vocal, and less accepting of such people in society, and also work on rehabilitating where that's possible, because it's not a simple matter of just policing. People get arrested and let out the next day, and we get back on the same wheel. So I do think we need a much more all of society kind of approach to dealing with gender-based violence. Otherwise, we will be here next year having exactly the same conversation.
Hopefully, we're not here having the same conversation next year, but I guess it's still a long way to go in terms of trying to eliminate this horrible pandemic that many of our women and children are going through. MEC, I'm going to mention the countries Cuba, Sweden. I mean, they seem to have a lot or a higher female political representation. I mean, we don't have to go too far here in this continent. Of course, Rwanda in the eastern part of our continent is having quite a surge in high female political representation. I know we've spoken about it, but is that something that South Africa can learn? I know it's not a legislative perspective, but maybe from a more inclusivity perspective, and that comes from society as a whole. Is there something that we as South Africa can learn to try and make sure that more females are active within the space of politics?
Absolutely. I mean, just you've cited some countries, but there is a report that is issued annually. No, it's called the Global Happiness Report or Global Happiness Index. And without fail, the top 3 countries, I think for the last 5 to 10 years on that report, have been countries that are either currently led by women or have in the recent past been led by women. And I'm talking about a lot of the Nordic countries, your Sweden, Denmark, I think Norway was in there. No, Finland was in there actually. And it's the same countries. And the correlation and why they score so high on the happiness index is because, these are countries that have higher levels of safety, general safety, but also safety for women, higher social protections, and their laws, let me say, are much more geared towards really looking after the most vulnerable in society. And I think that is a natural inclination of women leaders. And going to my earlier point, we need to understand the inherent benefit and value that women bring to leadership. Leadership, there's a phrase or a saying that says, leaders eat last. But if you were to look at our current South African political, arena, I don't think that saying goes in our current state. But if you think about the homes that many of us come from, I mean, generally when dinner is being served, who is the person who eats last?
Yes,
it's your mother, generally. Yes. Who will make sure that everybody else is fed before they are. And surely we would want to see that type of spirit more in our leadership. I certainly would. So I think we need to have a conversation, not so much about representation, but saying, what is the type of leadership we want as a country? And where is this more likely to reside? And how do we make sure that more people who deserve to lead get elevated into leadership. And not foot box ticking, not because we want to tick a box and say we are 50-50. It's about what type of country we want to be and the type of leadership that we believe will take us forward. And I personally have met a number of leaders. And this is not to discredit male leaders, by the way. I've met brilliant male leaders as well. I'm just saying we must not discount women leaders, and we must see the inherent value that they bring to the table, and not necessarily apply a different standard simply because we are talking about women leaders.
Yeah, there's something interesting you mentioned there, MEC, is that, it's more for the aesthetics part. We tick a box, it's a 50-50 representation, but they lack substance. And I think that's the sort of barrier that needs to be broken, isn't it? That this representation on paper is there. And that's important, isn't it? That the substance that is brought to the actual what's on paper is necessary. And I guess that is what we want to see as South Africans, isn't it? That this female representation is not just worked hard for, but also the deliverables, that whether they're serving a community, whether it's municipal, within a national perspective, or even within various councils, that the female representations are, as they would say, taking the bull by the horn and making sure those communities are serviced for.
100%. And I think we ourselves might sometimes be to blame as citizens because, sometimes what your perception of a leader is versus what perhaps your local known community leader is doing. You want a person who can stand on a stage and talk loud in a microphone and sing songs, and that's one form of leadership. Absolutely. But there may be other forms that we are missing out on because we are not ourselves, preparing ourselves, and we're not giving ourselves an opportunity to see other forms of leadership.
Sure.
And I think that that's the opportunity that we have before us. South Africa does. We have a crisis of leadership, ultimately, at all levels of government. And if we are going to get our country right, we have to make sure we have the best people in the driver's seat. And certainly leading a country or governing a municipality is not about how well you can sing. It's about, do you have a technical understanding of the work? Do you have a heart and a love for leadership and a selflessness about you where you're willing to serve your people? And then we must be able to identify the best people who have those qualities. And I believe there are many women that I certainly have a lot of respect for that embody those qualities, but are often overlooked because they are not the loudest. They don't have the machismo that we expect, from leaders. And I think we ourselves might need to reframe our own sensibilities about what a leader should look like, sound like, and be like.
MEC, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you, Faraz, and have a wonderful evening.
You have a wonderful evening too. That's Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, Gauteng MEC for Agriculture and Rural Development, also the National Chairperson of Rise Mzansi. This conversation continues with regards to women in politics. I'm going to be speaking to Angel Kanyile. She's a member of Parliament for the Democratic Alliance. She's also a member of the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Of course, a month to speak about when we come to women, and of course she serves in that portfolio committee. That discussion is next after this break.